and welcome to the Newchip Online Demo Week. My name is Armando Vera Carvajal, and I'm the Vice President of Product and the Accelerator Director here at Newchip. We're so excited to welcome you to this showcase of global Newchip startups as they share their stories with investors and entrepreneurs around the world. Joining us today for a very special conversation on the importance of generating good ideas and driving meaningful impact is Jeff Davidoff, a global marketing leader with years of deep insight, perspective, and results in the world of business. Now, Jeff is the founder of The Idea Monkeys, which works with companies and brands at inflection points where marketing matters. Jeff founded this company because he believes in the power of ideas, and he believes in using those powers for good. He previously served in numerous executive and high-impact roles, including the Chief Marketing Officer of Wondrous, the President of Walton Isaacson, and also the Chief Marketing Officer of Donuts Incorporated. Notably, Jeff also served as the Chief Marketing Officer for One, the grassroots advocacy and campaigning organization founded by Bono, with over 6 million members worldwide. Additionally, Jeff was the Chief Marketing Officer at Orbitz worldwide, leading marketing for Orbitz.com and also cheaptickets.com. Prior to that, Jeff spent 6 years as Vice President of Brand Marketing and Communications at Whirlpool, responsible for Whirlpool, Maytag, Amana, KitchenAid, and the Gen Air brands, in addition to serving as Vice President of National Marketing at Citibank. Jeff has over 30 years of experience in the marketing business, and he was also a founding member of Upshot, an integrated marketing agency with a blue chip client roster, including Coca-Cola, Anheuser-Busch, Sony, Mirage Resorts, among others. He received his MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management and his BA from Dartmouth College. He currently lives in Los Angeles, California. Wow, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us here at Online Demo Week. It's both an honor and a pleasure to have you here today.
Oh, thanks, Armando. Grateful to be here.
Absolutely. So you've been on this incredible journey over the past years, working and supporting some of the most recognizable and valuable brands in the world. Granted, marketing and strategy is at the core of what you help drive with these businesses. But when you look at the impact that you've enabled, we see that the importance of good ideas is fundamental in every case. So I wanted to talk a little bit about generating good ideas. You've made some interesting statements in the past about the fact that great ideas are scarcer and more valuable than ever. How can people, especially potential entrepreneurs, recognize when an idea is good enough to begin pursuing?
Well, thanks for asking. It's always nice to talk about my favorite topic, ideas. And I always like to start with real clarity about what's the problem we're trying to solve for. You'd be surprised how many times people spend their time bouncing around good or interesting ideas that actually aren't going to be able to solve the task at hand. So clarity up front really matters. And then from there, I like to start with optimism. When I first hear an idea or I first come up with an idea, I'm very friendly to it. I'm very kind to it. And I think I naturally look for all the ways that it might work. Somebody says something to me, my first instinct is always, how might that work? How might that be a good idea? And I think a lot of ideas never make it to the light of day because people start with pessimism and not optimism. Now, after that, then you should spend plenty of time trying to knock it down and pressure test it and see if it makes the cut. And then if it makes that cut, the way I know for sure is I just pitch all the time. If I'm working on something and I have an idea, I share it with everyone I talk to. And it's really easy to see when you're looking in people's eyes, like when the lights go on and when the lights go off. And I think that last part of the test really matters because there's a tendency for me, and I think for a lot of people, to naturally love your own ideas. That's not inherently a bad thing, but the way you make sure that you're not just talking to yourself is share it often and aggressively with other people and see where it works and see where it doesn't.
I like that a lot. And I think that really relates to what they say, seeing the twinkle in someone's eyes when we're talking about that idea, that passion that is there. You've spoken about people not only making decisions based on what they think, but also how they feel. In your perspective, how can someone utilize those new ideas to influence people, perhaps in the workplace?
Yeah, I think ideas matter so much in the workplace because the truth is the office or your workplace can be a painfully reductive environment. there's deadlines and there's pressure and there's scarcity of resources and there's other people who agree or don't agree and there's 100 different tools to collaborate, and all that stuff can be kind of reductive. I think at the end of the day, people are people and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And I also think people discount how empowering ideas can be. When people get something and they understand it and they really internalize it, what it means is they're going to be able to take it and run with it themselves. What you're always looking for as a leader is people who are on the same page, who believe in the same idea that you do, and they find ways to apply it or find ways to get there that you would have never thought of. So I think that ideas lift people up. They give you the impetus to move forward. And when you've got talented people putting them in place, they're going to apply it in ways and come up with solutions that you never would have come up with on your own.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what you mentioned about the reductive nature of being in a workplace, people within an organization, especially those who may not be in a senior position or as an executive, they may feel less comfortable sharing those new ideas, those perspectives that may effectively challenge the status quo. In your perspective and perhaps experience through the many organizations you've supported, what's the best way for these people to express those ideas?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that question has never mattered more than now, because I don't think people in the workforce have ever felt as empowered as they have now. I think the mandatory starting place is you have to learn how the business works. Okay, understand the fundamentals of the business. Every business, when you boil it down, is usually pretty simple. There's one or two or maybe three, but one or two big levers that drive the business. And you need to know what those levers are and fundamentally how the business works, because that'll let you know what's important and isn't important. And once you know that, just open your mouth and join the conversation. And I think the biggest hurdle to get over at that point is it's not a binary thing. I think that particularly with a lot of more junior people, there's this feeling like, this is my idea. You either buy it 100% and I win, or you don't and I lose. And that's not real. That kind of binary win-lose thing isn't real. It isn't how business works, and it isn't how you move forward in the business, right? What you want to do is be part of the dialogue. When I think back early on in my career, I had my mouth open a lot, and I was rarely the source of the solution, but I think a lot of times I was part of bringing up something, and then a conversation would move along and some solution would come up, and I felt like I was part of it. By the way, a lot of times when my idea was not right, there were things that I learned in the reasons why it wasn't that taught me a lot about the business. But I guess it's simple, like learn the business, know the facts, okay? Because otherwise what you have to say can't be meaningful. And then engage in the dialogue, and don't get caught up in this like, I was right or wrong, or I won or I lost. Just be part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, here at Newchip especially, we see thousands and thousands of great ideas on a regular basis with all the different entrepreneurs and founders that we support. It is incredibly exciting to see many of these different individuals and leaders develop these ideas into scalable businesses. With regard to the high levels of competition in the US for practically any product, how would you recommend that our founders and other business leaders use new ideas to generate a sustainable competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think it's a requirement. One of the things I say all the time is that creativity is not an option. Look, it's super rare that your business model or your idea is going to be in a group of one. There's going to be a bunch of other competitors who are like you, either a little bit or a lot like you, right? And your business model isn't your message. There's a difference between the two, right? So what's going to differentiate you? You have a legitimate business model, and you operate and you live in a legitimate business space, and you've got some competitors. It's your creativity and the ideas that you have that are going to separate you. And creativity isn't just messaging. It's creativity in any kind of problem solving. It could be in process. It could be in a new product. It can be in how you deal with staffing. It could be in anything, right? But I think so many times, particularly in the digital world, there's a sense like, hey, I've got an idea and I've created this thing, and that's all I need. To me, the best example is the whole boom in direct-to-consumer businesses, which I love. Okay, I'm in love with DTC, and most everything that matters in my life now gets delivered to me on a monthly or a quarterly basis, and I think that's great. And what you see in those categories is somebody was in first, and they were great, and they were definitely better than the have to buy it in the store model. And now they're also looking around, and they each have somewhere between 10 and 30 competitors who do the exact same thing. Okay, it's under a different name, but the business model is fundamentally the same. The product is fundamentally the same. So how do you win? Because what they're all facing now is diminishing margins as their competitors are taking the same product to market to the same consumer set using pretty much the same set of marketing tools. That's why creativity matters. That's why ideas matter. So having a sound business model and occupying a sound space in a marketplace is a starting point. It isn't an end point. And from there, it's creativity. It isn't outworking, and it isn't being smarter. Like, I never buy that idea. Like, never assume that your competition is less hardworking than you, and never assume that they're less smart than you are, because that's just got failure written all over it. Now, they might not be as consistently creative as you are, and that's something you can win on.
I think that's a really interesting point that you mentioned, Jeff. And I think I see this almost every day, especially whenever I get on social media, where I see a lot of the same types of products being advertised. And it's fundamentally the same thing, right? If we're talking about bed sheets that are made out of bamboo or some new type of short, right? What is the actual differentiator, right? And I think the idea, right, the creativity, the brand, the message, what it stands for is what ultimately drives my interest and my decision to convert, right, to buy the product. So I think, as you mentioned, the business model is that fundamental standing point. You have to have something that's going to work, right, that has that validation, but then innovating on top of that, right, finding your angle, finding the story that you want to impart, and identifying the market segment that relates to it, right? Very, very important. I want to now talk a little bit about impact initiatives, because I know that impact has been a big part of your journey as a business person, as a marketer. You've been involved with numerous impact-driven initiatives around the world. And in your experience, what has been the process of successfully executing these initiatives, besides relying on, as they say, hope as a plan?
Yeah, it's I'll tell you, it's been the great joy of my life to find a way to use my powers for good. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is the core things you learn as a successful capitalist are really valued and valuable in the do-gooder world. What I see the most often in the world of global do-goodery is a level of fragmentation and lack of scale that would never survive in the regular capitalist world. And it happens like for a well-meaning reason, which is someone has an experience and they feel passionately about something and they're like, I'm going to do something about it. Oftentimes that I'm going to do something about it is like, I'm going to start my own thing. I wish I had a magic wand where I could get like 1,000 organizations that all work on clean water, get them all in one room and be like, great, you're one organization now. But you can't do that. One at a time, applying just the basics of focus and emphasis on scale and on consistency and on constant innovation and creativity. Those things that are basics in the world of competitive capitalism are not today basics in the world of do-goodery. And it's really gratifying to apply them, because when you do it, you see the impact move in such an incredible way. I'll tell you a crazy story. When I was interviewing for the job at One, at the end of the last interview was with Bono. So warning, this is a name dropping story. And he had actually literally just come from meeting with President Obama to pick up me, and we're riding in a car to the airport. We're doing this interview. And he said, I don't like the word marketing. It tastes like tin in my mouth. Tell me why I need a chief marketing officer. At which point I left my body and I watched myself, looked down upon myself saying, well, because as far as I can tell, you have the proven ability to do the spectacular and you stink of the mundane. So 6 months after you've done something amazing, you find yourself pretty much right back where you were. How would you like each amazing plateau to be the jumping point for the next one? That's marketing. And that is a crazy story in a lot of ways, but it is the fundamental truth, right? And so many do-good organizations can pull off a moment, right? But precious few of them can do it consistently at scale, because the basics of marketing that we apply every day in the for-profit world just aren't in place.
That's incredible, and I think what's very unique about that is the ultimate decision maker behind that, Bono himself, right? I think that kind of alignment is critical and crucial for driving those impact initiatives. Now, many, if not the majority, of businesses operate based on the desires of key stakeholders, namely shareholders. How can people working on impact initiatives find a balance between maximizing impact, but also satisfying stakeholder desires, such as driving shareholder value through maximized profits?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about now is the holy grail, right? Which is, how do you do well and do good? And the first iteration of this was sort of CSR, like corporate social responsibility. And the way that was set up is like, well, I've got my core business here, right? And somewhere over here as a satellite, I've got a person or a couple of people who are responsible for social responsibility, and will a couple times a year give some money or have employees participate in something. I don't mean to say that in any derogatory way. That was an amazing first step forward, right? But we're in a different world right now, right? And the companies that are really leading and succeeding are finding ways that impact is tied to their core business. If you look at the ESG agenda and you look at your business, it would be hard to have a business that is not in some way directly or indirectly related to part of the ESG agenda. Okay, so the magic is, find something that is tied to your core business, so that by doing that, you are inherently enhancing your business while you're doing some good in the world. The reach for something shiny or to show off or to do a one-off thing, that's the trap, right? Look at your core business and find ways that what you do for a living is actually naturally tied to doing some good in the world. And that is I don't think that logically or strategically is such a hard thing to do. I think the challenge is operationally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think it's such a true point. If you're in the energy industry, do something that's going to make an impact in that same regard that aligns with your model. If you're in fintech, do something that's going to make an impact within that sphere of reality, but it is also tied to your interests and aligns so that you can do more and more of it. I think that's very, very important.
By the way, fintech's like such a great example. Like, if you talk about a super common problem, we have a generation of young people who are financially illiterate, mm-hmm. which is a problem for everybody. It's a problem for them. It's a problem for businesses who are trying to hire them. And it's a problem for fintech companies who like, you can only use fintech if you've got fin, right? So that to me is like, oh, just look at that and say, in what way could my tool be able to address that issue directly or indirectly? I'm actually working on something like that right now.
Wow. Oh, wow. No, and I think that makes a ton of sense. You mentioned ESG, and it seems like ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance, for those in the audience who don't know, is significantly more prominent in the business world than ever before. We see initiatives taken by many large corporations to address some of these issues, such as inequality in the workplace and also sustainability. You've stated in the past that it's no longer a question of if you want to do it, but rather how are you going to do it? So do you think that ESG is something that companies should focus on once they become more established, perhaps have more money? Or is it necessary for early stage businesses and startups to also focus on these types of initiatives?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll do it in two parts. I think the first part is, I would like to at least back up why I think it's a must, because back in the days of corporate social responsibility, that's if you had a leader who's like, yeah, I want to do the right thing. Look, now there is pressure from ESG investors, from activists, from your own employees, from legislation. There are all these pressures. So whether or not you are fundamentally a human being who wants to make the world a better place, or you just want to run your business, it doesn't really matter. There's plenty of urgency and need to do it. As far as the question specifically about early stage, I think that everyone needs to be aware of it. And I think depending upon the business you're in, it may or may not be something you need to, address right away. I will say that for early stage companies who are looking for money, there is a tremendous amount of ESG investment out there in the world, and fractions of it have been actually applied. I think a meaningful amount of the E money is in place, and that's about climate and things like that, because in some ways it's the most concrete and it's the easiest to measure, and there's lots of projects like that. But a lot of the S money about social and about gender and about equality, that money is just laying around. So I would say for people who are early stage and who are looking for money, see if there's a way that you are meaningfully connected to it, because that money's out there and is looking for a place.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And there's so much more out there than many founders are aware of. So I think it's a good point to look out for the resources and the money. You've addressed the drastic social evolution of ESG in the workplace over the past decades. Do you believe that this shift is due to a widespread increased desire for these changes, or is it more of a cultural shift from younger generations now entering the workforce?
I'm not really sure, and I'm not even really sure that it matters all that much. The truth is, it's probably a combination of things, right? Like, you certainly have a generation of employees who look at the world and look at their role in the world and their responsibility to the world in an entirely different way than prior generations did. So there's a demand signal on the part of employees. But I think the thing that's moving it the most, frankly, is the thing that often moves social issues the most, and it's where the investment money goes. And the large chunks of ESG investment money, I think, are what's driving this. Like the little known fact about like what tore down apartheid, it was when the investment dried up. So there was a tremendous social movement, and that's super important. And the mobilizing of people and emotion and attitudes really mattered. What tipped what tipped it over at the end of the day was the investment dried up. And on the other side of the equation, I think what's tipping it over now is the availability of all the investment.
Yeah, no. And speaking of, sort of the implications, what are the repercussions of businesses failing to hop on the ESG train in terms of missed opportunities?
I think it's across the board. Starting with employees, I think it'll be harder to retain top talent or to attract top talent. I think we already talked about the investment opportunity, and like you could be missing out on real investment dollars. I also think you could potentially get penalized by legislation that you'd be behind the curve on. So and also you can get penalized by consumers, because more and more they're demanding, what are you doing for the world?
Now, in your opinion, do you believe people, including specifically stakeholders, care about the underlying reasons for backing these impact initiatives, or is it just about the fact that they're happening, right? Like, oh, this company that that I support is just doing it and it feels nice, or do they actually care?
I think it's different for a lot of people. Probably more consumers care than investors or whatever. But not to be too glib, but I don't care why they care. I just care that it happens. Like one of the things I've learned in my years in do-goodery is I don't spend a lot of time analyzing people's motives for doing the right thing. If they're doing the right thing, that's great. And the why is sort of like debating the relative merits of gravity. I don't know. It exists. This demand exists, and that's the way the world is.
Yeah, yeah. Now, something that we've seen a lot here in the accelerator and seen from a lot of entrepreneurs and also heard from stakeholders is alignment of the business along with social issues. It's also something that's been trending a lot in conversations, on headlines, where people are taking jobs, right? Not just for a paycheck, but also the politics, the social issues that are behind that institution, that corporation. Do you think it's easier to align your business with success along social issues or based on employee desires within the company?
Yeah, it's hard. Like I think that full stop, that your alignment with social issues has to be tied to your business issues. Otherwise, there's no tenable way for you to continue to do it going forward. And you're going to be constantly, faced with this trade-off of like, Do I do the right thing or do I hit my quarterly numbers? And the answer is you have to do both, right? So for sure, what you are aligned with socially has to be tied to what you're doing from a business perspective. And I think it's really risky to ask your employees to pick. Now, I think you should get a sense, you should have a cultural personality that says, here's what we're about. That would attract people naturally who are part of that belief, right? And as you're operationalizing what you have chosen, I think it's super important to engage employees because they should be part of it, right? You should always have some way that your employee base can participate in whatever that social thing you're doing is, right? And you should also get feedback from them on it. But that's different from asking them to set the agenda. I said to somebody the other day, like, leadership by Survey Monkey is not leading, right? If you're asking your employees at all times to make all decisions, you're not leading. You need to say, I'm a business, I stand for this. Here's a social impact we're going to do. Here's how it's naturally tied to our business. Now, we're going to operationalize it in this manner. As an employee, you have an opportunity to participate in it and also an opportunity to feedback on it, say how we're doing or what else we might do. But the agenda needs to be set by the leadership. Now, to be fair, I am a man of a certain age, and maybe that is I'm not sure if that is an out of touch perspective, but it is mine.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Another thing that makes me think about this is that it's evident that the workplace today has drastically evolved from where it's been even a decade ago, both for employees and managers. This has been even more evident with the entry of Gen Zers into the professional workforce, as well as the advent of COVID-19 and its impact on the realities of work life. What are your thoughts, Jeff, on the impact of these changes within the workplace on shifting the balance of power away from the typical hierarchical structures, right? Is it easier or harder to be a leader within an organization today?
That's a great question. I actually think it is much harder, but potentially much more rewarding for you as a person and more rewarding for the company. The days when respect just came with the title, those days are gone, right? And respect has to be genuinely earned, like you do in any other relationship with your life. It's harder because it was easier in the old days when you were a manager or led a company, and you could literally say, because I said so. Good talk. Okay. And now it is a much more equal relationship. The upside is when you earn that trust over time, you're going to have a much more highly engaged employee because the relationship isn't only transactional anymore. Now there's something that you really have shared. I also think there are other realities, which is turnover is just going to be higher. That's just a fact. Get used to it. The days when people are going to spend their career someplace, that's gone. Those are going to be the unicorns. The people who worked 15 years or 20 years in some company and then were retired, those are going to be the people who are in a museum and we're going to go study them, right? There's going to be more turnover. Recognize it. That doesn't mean you're inherently doing something wrong. It just means that talent is much more mobile now. Now, if you really stand for something, you're going to have a core group of people who share not only their interest in the mechanics of what you do for a living, but they care about the principles that the company stands for. That's going to be loyalty. And even more than loyalty, that's going to be people who are applying their whole selves to the problem. Okay. When you are totally invested, you're going to bring your whole self to it. And they are going to be more productive, more creative. Great things will come from it. So, at face value, is it harder? Yes. Do I think it's a better world? Absolutely. Do I think it can be more personally and professionally rewarding? Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love hearing that. And I totally agree. I think the reality is that many more opportunities as new companies exist, new jobs come out, and a lot of options for people to move around. So it's very encouraging to understand that, especially as a leader, right? People have options. There's not something necessarily wrong with a business, although sometimes there may be, right, with the culture when people leave. So very, very good. One last point that I want to drive here is every year there seems to be new issues being addressed that are prominent in the public eye. It's even more clear that corporate America now has the social responsibility and financial pressure to address these issues. How can leaders, in your opinion, within an organization adapt moving forward as the perceived corporate responsibility towards these issues increases?
Yeah, you have to understand that you're living in a different world. And there used to be these very comfortable barriers between the business world and society at large. Those barriers are gone. Not only are they gone, but responsibility for leading on social and public health issues now rests on corporates. The organizations that are doing the most to drive gender equality in America are corporations. The organizations that are actually setting public health policy in America are corporations. Those are crazy. Those are two crazy sentences. If I had said that even 3 or 4 years ago, that would have been crazy. And by the way, over the years, so many times I gave advice to corporate leaders to be like, politics, social stuff, just stay out of it, mind your own business. Now it's all your own business. And the only mistake you can make is to pretend that isn't true. You just have to be aware that this is the way the world is now.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more that it's inevitable and they have to play a part in it. I want to talk a little bit more about creating authentic workplaces. We just talked a bit about the drastic shift in the social norms of corporate America. And I'm curious as to how these changes are seen in the workplace. How do you think leaders can create an authentic work environment that creates sustainable employee satisfaction?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I usually like to do is sort of translate authentic, because I think it's a much used term, and I think a lot of it's hard for people to action it because I'm not really sure what it means. To me, it's about being consistent and about being honest. And those are things I think that are much more concrete. Like if you're a leader, you should, as a person and for your company, have some small set of guiding principles. You're sort of like, what's the North Star, and what's your sense of right and wrong, and just be consistent in how you apply those principles, and honest and transparent about what they are. And look, not everybody's going to like every decision you make. Okay, but if you can at least go back and say like, hey, we decided this. Here's why. It is consistent with this principle that we have set forth, and that's how this sort of tumbled out. And I'm sharing it with you directly and honestly. Some people aren't going to like it, and if they dislike it enough to leave, that's also okay. It doesn't mean that anybody did anything wrong. But I think it's about consistency and honesty, and having some small set of guiding principles that really do guide you.
No, and I think it's important to, well, one, to have those guiding principles, but to, as you mentioned, be very consistent in actually following them and applying them, because we've seen it a lot, especially with working with so many different founders. Everyone has their sort of principles and values, right? But how aligned are you to those, right? And how are you actively, right, taking steps to apply those to your day-to-day, your organization, your customer base, the vision that the startup is working towards? I think that's super
and those principles,
to...
they're your best friend, not just for employee satisfaction, but for consistently making decisions. Because look, when things are going great, it's very easy to make decisions. Something hard or difficult or terrible is inevitably going to happen, right? Like, where do you turn to then? And the answer should always be, you turn back to those core founding principles, and they'll help guide you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Do you think that it is important for leaders today within organizations to make themselves seem as invaluable, or more so as human? And I think what I'm really asking here is, what are your thoughts on vulnerability as a leadership quality?
Thank you for asking that. I actually think that vulnerability is the single most underrated leadership characteristic of all time. And it's because I think we as a society cherry pick certain kinds of leaders. Look, Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs. I've had the chance to work directly with Bill Gates. Okay, here's the thing. I can say this to pretty much every founder you're going to meet. You're not Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. So stop acting like that. Okay, there are once in a generation talents who are so luminary that their extreme, not pleasant behavior is to everyone's benefit. That's not the regular case. Okay, and we've been talking so much about, like, engaging your employees and being authentic and how do they feel connected? They connect to you when you're a human being. You know, in my career path, I'm a change guy. So I go from organization to organization. And it's not uncommon for me to be a difficult combination of things, new to the organization and senior. Okay. And that's like a scary thing to people there. Okay. Because they don't know, this guy doesn't know me and he doesn't know how it works here, but he's senior. So he could do something dangerous. And what I always hope for early on is that something goes terribly wrong. Because when something goes wrong and I have the opportunity to go in and take responsibility for it and help be part of the solution and not point fingers and show that I'm human just like everybody else, that's what changes things. I wish that there was a way I could go in and be like, oh, great, I'm going to make this terrible thing happen. But obviously you can't. But vulnerability takes strength. There's courage in it. There's strength in it. It's not weakness, it's strength.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think it's something that we do impart a lot here with the founders that we support in their journeys. It's expected, especially when you're building a startup, running a business, you're going to hit lots of obstacles, challenges, constraints, right? And those test you every single step of the way. And how you react to them, how you take action based on those is equally, if not more important, right? In the eyes of the organization and stakeholders. And I think vulnerability is that understated quality that we need to see more of. And I couldn't agree more on the Steve Jobs reference. I think I've heard it so many times, and typically I just roll my eyes when I hear it. It's like, oh, we're applying the Steve Jobs approach to driving innovation, right? As long as you act this way and keep them afraid, surely something will come out of it. And it's like, no. As you said, I think Steve Jobs is an outlier. I think we were very lucky that, as a just general human race, we were able to get someone that created something that drove us to innovate in many ways. But he was very lucky, right? The timing was right. He found the right people to sort of take him to where he needed to go to bring the innovation that he did through Apple, through Pixar, etc. But people need to act with a little bit more empathy and vulnerability. I think that's very understated in the organizations today. Here at Newchip, we also work with hundreds of global startups on a regular basis from all industries, and it's incredibly fascinating and enlightening to see so many diverse issues that our founders are trying to solve. One of the best components of entrepreneurship is the authenticity and the passion that comes with founders and entrepreneurs trying to create solutions that are innovating, but also innovating over long term, right? They're sustainable. In your opinion, how can innovators in this space use authenticity to their advantage and drive a message that resonates with key decision makers, specifically, potential customers, or more importantly, investors?
Yeah, I think the first thing that folks need to do is understand, as a leader, this is your job. You can hire people to do all sorts of different operational things, okay? But a company's personality and culture and principles and behavior come from the top. One of the things that I've worked with a lot of young people and I've watched them, get more senior. And one of the things I always remind them of is hey, this is great. Now everyone's watching everything you do. Okay. And they're going to mimic it. Okay. Whether they understand the principles behind it or not. So you have a responsibility to be aware of that and to act and behave accordingly. And, so we were talking about before, if you've got a core set of principles, live that way. And that's what people will see. And that's what will be attractive and powerful over time. I learned a hard lesson early in my career where I was working at a place that I will not name, that to succeed there, it demanded that I act and behave and think in a way that's not like me. Okay. And I learned it early on that doesn't work for me. There's one Jeff Davidoff, and I need to be able to be myself, my whole self, whatever I am, flaws and all, whether I'm working or whether I'm home or with my family or what have you. And that's what worked for me. And I think that there's a myth, right, that you're this person, But then, like, when you go into the office or when you're in charge of something, you're something else. No, you're not. You are what you are. And that's what people are going to see. Everybody knows a pretender when they see it. Everybody knows when somebody's faking it. And nobody wants to invest in a faker or a pretender. Nobody wants to work with or for a faker or a pretender. So I think this goes back to that point about, vulnerability and being consistent and honest. These super simple human traits have a lot of business value. It also makes you a healthier and happier human being. So you got that going for you too.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And as I oftentimes tell founders when they're sharing their stories with investors, just be honest, be authentic. You're not fooling anyone, right? we can see right through it. And especially investors, they know that you want their money. So you might as well just be very authentic about what you're actually doing it and show that you care, right? Because they're in the business of backing people that make sense to that regard.
That'd be a great t-shirt, by the way. You're not fooling anyone.
Oh yeah. I would wear that one almost every day. Before we come to a wrap, I wanted to talk a little bit about also going off of this same notion of the frying pan in which founders from startups find themselves every day. In the startups, right? In particular, they're working in very high intensity environments with continuously emerging problems. This is an ongoing lifestyle of chaos and emotional turmoil that is basically a recurring theme across the global startup ecosystem. What advice might you have on how these entrepreneurs and emerging leaders can drive authenticity despite having to survive in this increasingly stressful work environment and set of circumstances?
Yeah, it's a great question. The bluntest thing to say is, hey, don't be a drama queen. There's a myth, right? That's like, if you're every day, every minute of your every day is so hectic and there's so much risk, and I'm so heroic and everything is so dramatic. No, it's not. Like, it's hard work and you are putting your whole self into it. Okay. You just know that. But the great leaders aren't the ones who are in a hot kitchen running around with their hair on fire. The great leaders are the people who have a cool head in the hot kitchen. It always amazes me when, like, I work on, when you're working on marketing things, of course something is going to go terribly wrong from the plan 100% of the time. It always surprises me when people are like, oh my God, something's wrong. And I'm like, of course something's wrong. It happens every time. So just like look at it, figure it out, and put the resources in place and do something about it. But I do think it's a terrible myth, right? That as a entrepreneur or startup leader, you need to be frantic. You need to be frazzled. You need to be on the verge of physical and emotional collapse at all times. That's BS. Like, I gotta tell you something. I get a chance to work with a lot of, small business folks, and I've made my share of investments, and I've invested in people like that a total of 0 times.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that, because I think it brings about, again, the authenticity factor, but also, let's just be real. The number of times that I've heard founders, when I check in, see how they're doing, it's like, oh, just the usual, working until 4 a.m. It's like, was that supposed to impress me? Like, wow, that's incredible. I'm so happy to hear it, right? What did you do this weekend? Oh, just working nonstop. It's like, that's kind of a red flag in a sense, right? You need to take time and live, right? Because startups especially, these are long-term plays, right? We know that you need to be in it for the long run, and that requires striking that balance. And like you said, being the drama queen, kind of living this whole busy culture, right? Where if you're not constantly busy, you're doing it wrong, right? It needs to change.
Yeah, I also believe strongly, like, it's about the business. It's not about you. Okay. Like, I now have a company of 1. That's a different thing. Okay. All these other businesses, like, you're supposed to be building out a business. There's supposed to be people who are doing these things. If this is your plan, that's a lousy plan. If your plan is 4 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, that's a lousy plan. Now, obviously, we're talking to people who are completely committed and completely hardworking. I'm not telling anybody, like, be lazy or don't do your work, but don't fall for that trap. Like, when I talk to people and they tell me how frazzled they are, my first thought isn't, gosh, that's great. My first thought is, they're definitely doing something wrong.
I think these are very powerful perspectives that you raised, Jeff. And I think I'm very grateful that you're bringing them to the conversation, because we don't hear it enough. Sometimes they're shared as truisms. Sometimes they're just, imparted at conferences or in motivational speeches. But, the number of founders that we see actually adopting these as aspects of their life is not as big as we would want to see it. So I think it's important that we're talking about it, the authenticity piece, the impact piece, the idea and the innovation part, very, very important. Before we come to a close, I'd love to hear, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who want to change the world for the better, not just, make a company that disrupts the market, not just get rich, right? Not just the usual stuff, like people who really want to make a difference. What advice do you have for them?
The first thing I would say is, come on in, the water's fine. We'd love to have you. Okay. I've had a chance to speak at a bunch of business schools. I went to graduate school at Kellogg, and I used to speak there with some frequency. And I would speak to a group of kids. I'd say, like, so who here thinks it's going to be super hard to be successful? Because the truth is, if you pretty much rinse and repeat what you did to get into this room, you're going to be just fine. Now, who wants to do something difficult? Okay. And it's just a completely different mindset. I'm business competitive. I'm intellectually competitive. I'm a problem solver. And, in capitalism, like, you win, like there's goal, you win. And the do-gooder world, you lose a lot more often than you win. And you're tackling problems that are likely not going to be solved in your lifetime. I was working at one for 6 months, and I was in South Africa, and we were doing some work there. And Bono said to me, this thing, extreme poverty, we're not going to solve this problem in your lifetime or mine. And my first thought was like, wow, worst pep talk ever. Okay. And then he said, but if you go on this journey, it'll be your journey of a lifetime, and you'll make a real difference. And boy, was he right. Okay. It was and continues to be my journey of a lifetime. And I do feel like I'm making a difference. And it turns out that personally, I'm happier being a small part of something very, very big than I was being the big shot in charge of something much smaller. And I also weirdly find myself happier making 2 step forward, 1 step back progress against problems that won't be solved in my lifetime for sure, than I was winning easily against small things. So what I'd say is that, boy, the need is there. The world needs you. And what do-gooders need are people who have been steeped in the competitive nature of real business to bring that thinking and that acumen and that focus and that commitment to the biggest problems facing the world. And there's no looking back. I will say that, like, once you're in, there's no looking back, or at least that's been my experience.
I love that. I really genuinely love that. And I appreciate that perspective. And I think understanding that it is hard work, but it's unbelievably rewarding. And I think with the anecdote that you shared, the perspective, right, is very important. Sometimes the most worthwhile and meaningful things that we go after take time, and they may take much longer than our time here on this planet. But being that initial catalyst of change, being the one that's driving that initial impact is very important. And I think I'm very much aligned with that definition of personal success, and I believe in it. And I hope that many founders around the world also can relate and resonate with that. Jeff,
I do too.
Thank you so much for your time. I know you're just incredibly busy, but very, very grateful again for your time, for your perspectives. I've learned just so much from just hearing you talk about all these experiences. And I know that our audience, investors, entrepreneurs around the world really appreciate you as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. The pleasure's been all mine. Really enjoyed it.